Hi, I'm Grayson Lehman,
I'm Donnie Fisher.
and we're here with Rick Barrett. The time is 11:30 on Tuesday, May 19th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and this is our oral history project.
So what are those two flames from San Francisco?
How are you doing today, Mr. Barrett?
Is this the interview?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really? I thought the teacher had to be here.
Go ahead.
I'm just fine.
Let's start early. When and where were you born?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 1946.
What neighborhood in Milwaukee did you grow up in? What was it like?
I was on the east side. If anybody knows where Brady Street is, I was a block and a half south of Brady Street on a street called Cambridge.
What are your earliest memories of Milwaukee as a kid?
I do have a memory when I was living there, and I was 4 years old, and looking out the front window, there was such a snowstorm that it covered the roofs of the cars when I was about 4 years old.
That was 1950?
Yeah.
What kind of work did your parents or family members do?
My dad worked both at Harley-Davidson and then at Square D. Both of those were factory jobs. My mother did not work.
What school did you attend, and what do you remember most about them?
I was at a Catholic school from kindergarten through 10th grade. I went to St. Peter and Paul. Kindergarten was at Holy Rosary. The teaching I had all the way through was from Notre Dame nuns. That was really great. I went to Messmer, but I had to spend my 9th grade in St. Peter and Paul because the amount of people applying for Messmer were so great, you couldn't get a freshman class in there. So I went to 9th grade at St. Peter and Paul, and then Messmer as sophomore year, but then money tightened up, and I ended up going to Riverside for my last 2 years.
What did people in Milwaukee do for fun when you were young?
Ooh. At what age?
Let's say elementary to high school.
We belonged to St. Peter and Paul Parish, and when you think about it, as the difference is now, there were so many people that were in walking distance to the church. It was like a community in itself, and everything that was celebrated all through the years was kind of celebrated with the community because we were all part of the same church. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a little different back then. I mean, when I walked to school in the morning, it was only 3 blocks away. But I could tell you that every house I passed usually had at least one, maybe 4 or 5 boys that went to school with me. It was that kind of situation, so it was a real community.
So I'm guessing you spent time with those people?
Yeah, we did. I remember Little League. I remember that as a young man. My dad was their coach. We had Catholic names like the popes and the bishops, etc., but it was fun.
Do you remember any music or movies or radio shows that were popular with you?
Not really. No, well, the music of the time, whatever, I didn't pay that much attention to it when I was that age, but I can tell you this, the 70s music was probably the best of this whole era.
What was downtown Milwaukee like during that time?
Yeah, it was concentrated on Wisconsin Avenue. What you're on right now here, Wisconsin Avenue, that was a big deal back then. It's Wisconsin Avenue then is like Blue Mound now out in Brookfield. Very busy, the heart of the situation of Waukesha. That's what Wisconsin Ave was like, and it went from the lake all the way up to probably 6th or 8th Street, and then they would turn around, and if you were a young man, they called it cruising. You would take your car, and you would go up and down Wisconsin Avenue. They had movie theaters, they had lots of activity, so Wisconsin Avenue was the main place when I was a teenager.
What did you drive? Do you have a nice car?
I had a car from the time I was 16 throughout. I had a paper route when I was a kid. I made money, but that, and I paid for my first car, and I had a '53 Chevy, then I had a '56 Chevy, then I had a '58 Chevy. The '58 was kind of cool because it had a Corvette engine and a shift on the floor. 3-speed, went pretty good.
Moving on, how would you describe any race relations or segregation in Milwaukee? Was there any?
Yeah, I think there was. I didn't have a real opinion about it because I wasn't affected by it very much. You know what I mean by that? I did. The only time I encountered it is when I played ball. I would come down, for instance, I played basketball, and we would come to Jesu, and that's where we met a lot of the black guys that played basketball, which was kind of competitive, and it was fun.
Did you notice any other major social or political changes happening in the city while you were growing up?
I didn't pay a lot of attention to that as much when I was a kid, no. It just was kind of our world, and I don't remember being that involved in it until I got older.
Did you follow any sports teams closely?
Oh, yeah. All of them. In 1957, which would have made me 11 years old, the Milwaukee Braves won the national pennant right here at what was then called County Stadium. The Packers, before they played their games exclusively in Green Bay, used to play half their games at Milwaukee County Stadium. And to this day, when they print season tickets in Green Bay, some are called the gold package, et cetera. And what that means is the people who had season tickets at Milwaukee County Stadium right over here still own those season tickets and still owned a package of about half the games in Green Bay. So they drive up to Green Bay, whereas before the Green Bay used to drive down to Milwaukee, now they drive up to Green Bay.
And so you said Milwaukee County Stadium now is Miller Park?
Well, it became Miller Park, and now it's American Family Field.
Gotcha.
It's actually in a little different position. Milwaukee County Stadium was on the same grounds, but farther south and more east. So the new stadium was built just off center to where it used to be, I believe. Pretty close, but not too far.
Did you meet any celebrities or players from?
Oh yeah, one of the big things we did when we were a kid is we would go to the games, and then after the game we would sit around for autographs. I got a ton of them, but a lot of the players afterward would like to go to the east side because there was places that they like to go to for both to eat and to drink. And when we found that out, they'd ask us sometimes because they didn't know, and we'd say, yeah, we know where that is. They would drive us home because then they would drop us off where they were going. It was kind of fun.
What was the high school culture like in the 60s?
I don't know how to explain it. At first I was at Messmer. It was kind of like it is now with you guys. It's a Catholic culture. But then when I went to Riverside, it was different. I can say this, that I was a B to B plus student in high school. And when I transferred to Riverside, I became an A student, and that's not because I am an A student. It was just the way it was. I didn't have to take many books home. It wasn't that difficult. It was just a different atmosphere at public school.
Can you talk about your experience being drafted into the military?
All guys who are 18 had to sign up for the draft, and I think still do. I don't know, do you guys have to do that when you're 18?
I believe there's changes going on right now because of the war in Iran with the rules on the draft.
You had to sign up for the draft, and that was on North Water. So I went when I was 18 immediately. I signed up for the draft when I was 18, but I told them I was planning to go to college. So instead of a rating of being available immediately, I forgot what that was, 1A or something, you got a deferment for military. And I got a deferment right away because I told them I was going to college, which I did. But after the first year, I kind of ran out of money. and I wanted to go back to school. And that wasn't different back then. What I mean is, I think at this time, the big thing is student loans. That gets you through. Back then, you kind of paid for your college or got it from somewhere, either a scholarship or something, or your parents, or however, but it wasn't uncommon to earn money, pay for what you were doing, and then go back. And that was my plan, but I dropped out in December of that year, and 2 weeks later, I got a letter, and I was supposed to report to the draft board for a physical on February 14th. I got there thinking it was a physical and information, and as it turned out, I was drafted that day. I hit that fast. And when I say that fast, I mean, let me explain. There are about 60 of us there. And of the 60, we all went through testing, et cetera. And we got to the end, and they called out 6 names, which was one of them was me. And the other fellows were told to go home and come back at 9 o'clock at night. They were going to Fort Knox, Kentucky. They were being drafted into the Army. So we all thought, maybe we failed or something. They put us in a separate room. I got in the room, and we were sitting waiting, wondering what's going on. And then a Marine colonel walked in the door, pretty gruff guy, walked up and stood on the chair, stood on the desk, stood there. And that's how we knew we were in the Marine Corps. He says, I'm going to administer the oath of office to you, and I don't care if you raise your hand like you're supposed to, or he said some pretty colorful language. He said, stick your finger wherever you want. He says, but you're still going to be in the Marine Corps. And from that point, when he got out, they took us down 3 flights of stairs, and there was a big green bus outside. From there, we went to Mitchell Field. They gave us 1 phone call in 2 minutes, and then off we went. Landed in San Diego that night, and if you've ever been to San Diego, the airport in San Diego is exactly next to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. And it's literally a cyclone fence separating it. And so they drove us into there, and they have these footprints. So if you get 90 guys, there's 90 set of footprints, and 90 guys is a platoon. So everybody's standing on these footprints, and you're all looking at a board just like you are here, except it's the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's the rule that you have to live by as a recruit, and it was telling you what happens to you if you don't do it the right way. And so that was about 1 a.m, and they woke a guy up to give us haircuts at that point in the morning. They buzzed your heads, and they don't ask any questions. They just buzz it. And if you have a scar or anything, that comes off too. So you see all these guys sitting there, and the blood's coming down. So it was an awakening that night, and then they give you your uniforms, et cetera, and then they put us into these Quonset huts, and by, I think it was 6 in the morning, we were back up. And that's when it started, the recruiting, the whole training.
You said they gave you 1 phone call. Who'd you call? I
called my mom. I said, Mom, I'm going to San Diego, I'm in the Marine Corps. And she said, what the heck did you do that for? I said, I didn't. They did. And by the way, when you go there, they give you a form at the draft board anyway. And the form is for you to list your preference of what military outfit you want to go to. Well, I knew at the time there was more education possibilities in the Navy and the Air Force, and I had Marine down last. It didn't seem to matter. They just randomly picked 6 guys and sent us into the room. So I don't think it had anything to do with that. But as it turned out, I think I told you, I was glad that it happened, because the Marine Corps is just a division of the Navy. It's a smaller group, and it was easier to keep track of people like us. And so we had, if you want to say, a little bit more personal attention. That's what I felt anyway.
How did your mom react when you called her? What did she say?
I told her, she just said, "What did you do that for?" And I said, "I didn't do it. It was done for me." And I said, can't talk very long. I just wanted to tell you I'm going to San Diego. I'll be there tonight, and whenever I can get in touch with you, I will. And we hung up. That was it.
What do you remember about your basic training in San Diego or in other places?
Once you learned that drill instructor was going to find you sooner or later, and he was going to, I don't want to say pick on you, but single you out. And once you learned that he did it to everybody, you didn't feel like you were being picked on. You felt like everybody was going to get the same treatment, and they did. He would find out anything about you and make you unique to him. If your name was funny or different, he gave you a different name. And the whole purpose I learned later was to test you. And the whole thing was a test. If you can maintain your being cool under pressure, that was the whole point of all of it. So once you learned that, you kind of just rolled with the punches. No matter what he said to you, you weren't going to come out kind of on the lower end of it, but how you reacted to it was the key. He would ask you questions that you can't answer. For instance, he'd say, "Jump up." You'd jump up. He says, "I didn't tell you to come down." And you'd look at him, and if you smile at the drill instructor, you'd be smiling before you, gay? And they would just play with your mind like that, because usually when they would do that is when they would take you as a group to the next thing you were going to. You had time, just like we have time here before this. We had time, and that's what he would really screw with us. He would play with your mind a little bit to see how you reacted to it, put pressure on you. And there were some guys that didn't handle it real well, you know? They just didn't handle it well.
Do you have any other funny stories about names people were called?
Oh yeah, I have some, but I don't know if I should say it here.
Go ahead.
Well, when you're in the military, my drill instructor was black. And ironically, his name was Sergeant Skull, Skull, and his name right there was Skull. And so he used to walk with a black T-shirt that had a skull and crossbones on it and a Smokey the Bear hat. And when he talked to you, he'd take the brim of his hat and he'd hit you on the nose, right on your nose. "Are you listening to me, Private? Are you?" And so he gave everybody a name. And I remember one. I apologize for this, but here's what he said. We had a guy. It was a long Polish name that ended in SKI, and the drill instructor, being black, couldn't even pronounce it. He kept looking at his name. He said, "Holy shit! He's from now on, you're alphabet fucker. When I call alphabet fucker, you come here, because I can't pronounce that thing." And everybody called him that from then on. That's what his name was, and it was just funny. And there was things like that. He would tell you, "I want you to limit the amount of letters you get, because we have to monitor all that stuff." And so he says, "If you get too many letters, I'm not going to be happy." So the way he'd have to limit you is when they'd have what they call a mail call. He would call out your name, and you'd have to run up, and he would just hold the letter like that, and you had to run by it and grab it like that, and then run around the parade grinder. Well, the parade grinder was almost 2 miles, completely around. You didn't want to get too many letters. And if you got somebody whose mommy was taking care of them by sending them cookies or something, oh boy. We had a guy. He said, "Okay," so I forgot what his name is. "Come here." He says, "Your mommy sends you cookies. We got cookies for you." And so he had somebody take a canteen and go get water. And he laid the guy flat on his back, and he put a chair just like this right over him. And he sat over him. He said, "Open your mouth." And he would drop the cookies in his mouth and pour water into his mouth. He'd say, "Chew." And he would do it to the same cadence we used to march to. And this guy was coming out all over. And he says, "Is your mommy going to send you any more cookies?" And it went on and on. He said, "You want to write the letter now to tell your mommy to stop sending the goddamn cookies? We feed you here. Tell her that." It was kind of funny. But the whole point is that they would mess with you, and it was kind of, it was traumatic if you were the guy being messed with, if you couldn't handle it, but it was really funny to watch, I'll tell you that. I remember one guy, he left the mess hall and he took an apple with him. And at the time, we were going to some infantry training thing, and we all got on a big green bus to take us there. And then we all got off, and we were standing in line like we always did. And all of a sudden, he steps off the bus and goes, all right, he's got an apple core. He says, who had the fucking apple? And nobody answers. He says, okay, if nobody tells me who had this apple, all of you are going to have to doing physical exercises for the next hour. And so the guy, feeling guilty because he figured the whole platoon have to suffer, he kind of raises his hand and he brings him up there. This apple core had been stomped on by 90 guys. He made him finish it. It was, those are the kind of things I remember explicitly. But all it did, to tell you the truth, is bring us kind of all together, because you all got picked on. It's just how you handle it.
Did you have any friends from basic?
Yeah. Funny, I don't remember a lot of people, but I remember the kids, the guys I spent time with, both there and in I still remember their names. They were, well, I have pictures, if you want to see them. Some of these guys, you know, I don't remember, at my age, I don't remember a lot of my friends, but I remember them because I remember their names and where they were from and their stories. And one guy, a real close friend of mine, this guy right here, he was from Hammond, Indiana. His dad was a U.S. Deputy Marshal. I remember I came home on leave with him one time, and we went to Chicago because his dad's car had a star on the back for a U.S. Deputy Marshal. We could go to Chicago and park wherever we want. Just park wherever we want. Just stop it, get out, go wherever we want. You're never going to get a ticket that's got the Marshal's thing on the back. I remember vividly that was him. And so a lot of the guys I remember quite a bit, but you know what? I never saw him, heard from him again after that.
Could we show that to the camera?
This is a picture. Now, this particular one, this guy's name was Burke. And Dan Burke lived in Hammond. And his dad, like I said, was a U.S. Deputy Marshal. Hammond is a community. In fact, right now, you know what Hammond's noted for? It might be the new home of the Chicago Bears. Hammond has proposed billions of dollars for a stadium for the Bears where Chicago can't. And they'll either end up in Hammond or Arlington, but not in Chicago. But anyway, that's where he lived. And I had a couple other ones that were, one in San Francisco was a good friend of mine. That his dad owned a funeral home. And we'd spend a lot of time talking when we were over there. And that's how I got to know him a lot closer.
Did you know much about Vietnam before you were sent there?
No, nothing.
What was your first impression when you arrived there?
Well, it's a third world country. When we got there, there's one highway in South Vietnam that I saw. I was in the northern part of the country. And it went, when I first got there, it was very narrow. It went north in the morning and south in the afternoon for traffic. But we, meaning the military, took care of those roads and made them. And by the time I was halfway in there, it was a representative road, two-way traffic, everything. And those were the Navy. Have you ever heard of Seabees?
Yep.
Seabees, the Navy is the engineering department of the U.S. Navy. They usually land before anybody else, and they prepare landing sites, they prepare ship entries, they prepare roads, etc. Put in engineering, any type of electrical, or that's their job. And when I was there, we were 3 miles in from the South China Sea, but they were the ones that were in that area just east of us, along the South China Sea.
Gotcha. For clarity, you were in the northern part of South Vietnam.
Correct.
Okay.
The northern part, yes. I flew into Da Nang. Didn't know what to expect. Got off the plane. By the way, it might be interesting for you to know, I flew in on a regular flight, meaning the government contracted with private companies to do the flying. It wasn't a military flight. It was no, it was all military on it, but it was a contract. And they flew us in, and we landed in Da Nang, and I found that interesting. And I ended up about 10 miles, 8 to 10 miles north of Da Nang. Now, I don't know if you have a map or find out where Da Nang is, but it's in the northern part of South Vietnam. And if you knew Vietnam, you come in from the sea for about 2 or 3 miles, and then a bunch of hills and mountains occur. And it was mountainous area that we were in, which I think I told you one time, which I'd never understood. What I mean by that is, I was in the Marine Corps. It's a division of the Navy. We're basically battalion landing teams on ships that go to places. There's 2 divisions on the East Coast and the West Coast. If you're on the East Coast, you're responsible for the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. If you're on the West Coast, I suppose it would stretch all the way to Hawaii or whatever, but I didn't understand why the Marine Corps, an amphibious force, was in the mountains, and the Army was in the Delta, was in the amphibious area. I never understood that. You know, the only thing I could think of is that we are a smaller unit, and that was a smaller area that we were protecting as opposed to a bigger area down there. I don't know, but I never understood it.
What was daily life like for you there?
Normal. I want to say, if you're in South Vietnam, what it was is the conflict between the North and the South was that the North was being backed by communists, and the South ostensibly wanted to be free. Now, the North wanted to impose the will on the South, and the reason we were there, supposedly, was to allow the South to be the South. So I think they used to call it a conflict, not a war, and we were there to almost be like a police force to protect the South from the North.
Is there a moment or moments that you find especially meaningful or significant from your service?
A moment. I think in general, it's the whole thing. I thought of a certain closeness with the guys I were with. The sad part is you don't see them again. Can't think of a particular moment other than individual things that were interesting, but not a moment that stands out to me. I got some pictures in here of things that were important to me there. This little girl. If you were in Vietnam for a little while, you'll notice that there is a different set of rules for family. If you're 100% Vietnamese, you're fine. You live with your family. If you're not, you're kind of left out in the cold. This little girl was what they call Amerasian. She was part American, part Vietnamese, and she was kind of left. There was other ones here. I had a small little boy, but this girl was kind of close to me. We knew the Navy next to us, and the Navy is where the medical department for the Marine Corps exists. And the doctors in the Navy were not in the Marine Corps. So we used to take these kids and we would take them to this naval base to get them checked over and taken care of, because otherwise there wouldn't be. There was no care for them. And if I remember anything about that part of the country, it was that, taking care of the kids. They didn't have fruit. If you figure their country, it's mostly rice. It's their staple of their diet. There's not much fruit there. And we had sea rations. Now, sea rations for if you're out in the field, I spent most of my time on the base. So if I was on the base, I was eating at the mess hall. That meant that the sea rations that I had, I used to collect, and we would give it to the kids. And I gave them, there's this little tool, it's about this big, it opens, that little tool can open a can of food, and that's for sea rations. And I gave them to them, and they would wear them. And then when we'd give them the sea rations, they could open those cans, and they loved peaches, pears. They just loved it because they couldn't get their hands on it. So I found that fun, taking care of the kids.
Did you receive any letters or news from home that mattered when you were overseas?
I did get letters. In fact, I didn't write back enough because I was kind of interested in what I was doing. I was kind of consumed at what I was doing there, and I didn't write. In fact, my mother wrote to the Marine Corps and told them that I had to write her because she hadn't heard from me for a while, and she was worried. And so I remember getting a letter telling me to write more often because I didn't do it enough.
What were you doing in Vietnam? What were you doing?
I was a draftee. If you're a draftee, you'll find this out. They get you for 2 years. And if they get you for 2 years, they don't want to spend a ton of time training you into a field, or what they call an MOS, your medical occupation. They don't want to put you into an occupation that takes too much training, because all your time of the 2 years will be in the training and not the doing. And so if you're a draftee, a lot of times you get put into a place where there's less training, and that's what happened to me. I ended up in supply. When I first came out, I had taken a bunch of tests while I was in there, and I was offered some things, but all of them required extending your service, and I didn't want to do that, so I didn't. But I could have gone to pilot school, but most of the guys that came out of pilot school at my age at that time ended up being helicopter pilots. And the helicopter pilots at that time had a very low life expectancy. Helicopters don't take much to take them out of the sky. I mean, it really doesn't. I mean, you hit it in the right spot and it'll come down. And so I decided not to do that, and I stayed with the MOS I had, which was supply. So if you're asking me what I did in Vietnam, I'll show you some pictures here, if I can find them. What I did is I was put in supply, and of course when you're there, there's no warehouses. The supply basically is gear. And what's the gear? It's basically trucks, generators, radio equipment. Didn't have cell phones back then. Anything that rolled on either tires or tracks. I don't know if you ever heard of an Ontos? Ontos is kind of like a mini tank, smaller, except instead of having one turret on there that shoots a missile, they had 3 on each sides of what they call recoilless weapons. Those are long tubes that when they fire, there's a backblast area and then it goes out the front. What's the importance of that? They had 2 400 engines in there. That thing could move. And they could be on a flat ground, they could be doing 40 miles an hour, spin that turret and fire and not affect them, because that large blast area doesn't knock them off course or anything, because it's a recoilless weapon. And I used to take those things off the ship, and what happened is I would go down to the deep water pier, and these things, all the equipment would come from off ships, and they would get to a staging point, and then I would have to get it to where I was on the base 8 miles north And then there was a large sandy area that we kept everything. And when people would request, people being the cities around Vietnam where I was, were the border up on the DMZ. Do you know what the DMZ is?
Demilitarized zone?
Demilitarized zone. Odd word because it's the most militarized place you ever saw. It was the area that defined north from south. That was Cantien. And then there were towns like Pleiku, Phu-Bai, Chulai. Those are the towns I would go to deliver equipment to Marine outfits. And that's what I did. I basically lived on a base that had a large open area which we stored all the vehicles that I got from a deep water pier in Da Nang, brought there and staged until they were requested. And then we were requested, it was my job to organize a convoy, get it there, and then they'd fly me back.
Did you ever see combat?
Not a lot. South Vietnamese was like, during the day, it would be like a third world country that is doing business on a day-to-day basis. You know what I mean? The people were working in their fields, et cetera, or these small little hamlets that they were in. But then at night is where the action was. And we were on base at night usually. Our contact with the war were two things. Either we were sent out on a patrol around the perimeter to guard it or protect it or find out what's there, or we had to worry about incoming. And that was basically what we worried about. Now I can show you some pictures of what happens when they hit. This is what happens to the hamlets we stayed in.
Can I hold that up to the camera?
This is what happens to when they hit with rockets. It'll take a Quonset building, which is basically wood-sided plywood and metal roof, and when it hits, these rockets do that kind of damage. So we had to worry about rocket attacks, and there's two kind of rockets that they would fire. One was what they called a 122. It was anti-personnel. That meant that the shell, when it hit, would explode into very small pieces of shrapnel to get as many men as possible. And then the other ones were the 140s. Those were concussion rockets. They would be the kind of thing that if it would hit it inside of a building, it would blow the building down. So that's what we worried about at night, the rocket attacks. And what happened is the people that you dealt with during the day that were the normal South Vietnamese you thought, they were the North Vietnamese sympathizers and the Viet Cong. And what they would do at the end of the day was they would make their way out of town and head towards these mountains or hills in which they had emplacements where they had these tubes that they would fire into our area. And so they would go underground in tunnels and go there, get there, fire off these rockets, get back in and make it back in. And that was what we worried about. So in answering your question about the war, during the day, very little. It seemed like normal practice. I could go by days and days and sometimes even months, and not during the day, never even hear anything. It's just normal. But at night, that's when the action started occurring, and you had to be careful.
Were you ever injured in combat?
Yeah, I had, well, this building right here, I had, the only reason I'm here today is the rocket that came through the roof did not detonate when it went through the roof, or we'd all have been gone. What happened was it went through the roof, continued, went through the plywood floor, continued, and drove down almost 3 feet before it ignited. And when it did, it created a silo effect, and the backblast shot up from the hole that it dug. And for me, when that happened, I was laying right next to where it went in. And the shot that went up in the air burned my feet with sulfur burns from the shot, and my feet were burning. And so that night I had that problem, but wasn't thinking about it too much because other guys were hurt much worse. And one of the things we did when we got a rock attack, the only concrete building on the base was a shower. And our instructions were to get everybody to the shower because it was concrete where the wounded would be, and that's where the medics would come. And so I did that, and on my way back, to be honest with you, I never even noticed it. But a rocket went off, and I got shrapnel on my left leg. And when I was bringing the guy in, he says, well, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going back." He says, "Come here, dude. Look at that." And I had shrapnel on my left leg, and eventually they took it out, some of it out there, and they flew me to Yokosuka, Japan. And I sat, and they put a drain in my leg and let it, because what they were worried about was infection. And they let it drain, and they're cleaning it. I think I showed you, but I'll show you this. They eventually came and gave us Purple Heart. And what I'd like to show you about it, though, is this is the shrapnel that they gave me when they get. This is the Purple Heart, by the way. Now, how they gave that to me.
Is that the shrapnel that was in your leg?
I believe so, yes. And they couldn't have been that much. That's too much. But they gave it to me and put it in here when I left. But you got it? Okay. When you get those, let's see if I can find it. We had this. Oh, by the way, here's an example of all the trucks we had on that base when we. See, I would get all those trucks.
Is that you?
No, that is two of my buddies. That one's a real good friend of mine, Chuck Hosakas. But that's us. Now take here is, these are the huts that we stayed in. And these are the fighting holes. You see the sandbags would be there's a hole right here where you go in. And that's where you'd be during a rocket attack. But I had a tent that I worked out of, and that was the tent. When you're on a truck and I'm going somewhere, if you take a look, that's kind of a village building, and you see the women walking alongside. They would wear those type of hats. This is us riding on the back of a truck, and those are, you know what that is? That's like a village marketplace, if you will, believe it or not. That's all food in the back of that truck, and they're all getting food and vegetables. See that? And that was the road by the time we got finished, by the way. This is kind of like a marketplace there. That's their type of marketplace. Pretty basic.
Yeah.
A couple of tents and a couple of wood buildings. Okay, what I was getting to was when I got this thing, a helicopter came in on our helipad, and the general came off to give us that, and that's him when he got out of the helicopter. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. When
Okay.
he came to give you the Purple Heart, you mean?
Yeah. Guys, when you go there, I spent almost a year there. There were no officers. They stayed the hell away. And, well, it was all sergeants and below, really. And if an officer came by, he flew in and then flew out. They didn't spend much time in the area. But, and so he flew in specifically to do this, and then out he went. Now that's me right there, and a good friend of mine. What else here? See, this is what the buildings look like the next morning, you know, it just was typical. Let's see if I can find something that's more interesting. You know what an M60 machine gun is?
Yeah.
That's one. This is an M60.
Is that what you carried?
No. When we first got there, we trained on in boot camp, and when we got to country, is you ever familiar with the term M14? M14 is a 7.62 millimeter, and it's got a wooden butt and a wooden handle. It's rather heavy. If you learn anything about rifles, they have what they call lands and grooves inside. That weapon had a rotating groove inside it so that the shell came out and spun this way. Tended to be really accurate. Halfway time, our time there, they switched over from the M14 to the M16. Well, this M16 is only 5 point whatever 6 millimeter, and it's only 6 pounds total. And the whole purpose, I remember, was that the less weight you have on your weapon, the more ammo you can carry. So what we did is we took magazines and we would tape them together. And the way we would tape them together, you take 3 of them and you'd put 2 and you put the third one inside going the opposite direction. So if you picture yourself taking a magazine and putting it into your weapon, you expend 20 rounds, you pull it out, reverse it, and stick it back in on this side. And when you expend 20 rounds, you pull it out, move it over. So you can get 60 rounds out of one of those. And so you could, if you could carry an M16, you could carry more ammo at night because the weapon was lighter. The only problem is when they first came into country, there was a problem. They got the ammo there before they got the weapons there. And the ammo was sitting on the deep water pier for quite a while before the weapons got there. And the problem was that the ammunition was sitting in the sun, and the jackets of the ammo swelled. And what happened is you take one shot, and then instead of the casing expelling, it was stuck in the chamber because it was too fat, because it was swollen from the heat. And so there was a lot of problems, and we had to get new ammo because it was detrimental. You get in a firefight, these guys were in a problem because if you take an M15, there's a pin right in the middle. If you knock that pin out, the weapon breaks in two. So when you break the weapon in two, is what you're trying to do is you're trying to take a cleaning rod and knock the shell out of the chamber, and these guys, you don't want to do that when you're in the field. So it was a problem. And so that was the switch between the M14 and the M16. It was a lighter weapon. And the other thing about it is the M14 doesn't have lands and grooves that way. I understand what it does is the projectile tumbles. Instead of doing this, it tumbles. And when it's tumbling, when it hits in combat, instead of piercing, it rips. And that's what combat's for, you know. You hit someone here, takes them out to there. If you hit them here, it takes them out to there because it rips. It doesn't clear through a carbine. A carbine will clear through, and if it doesn't hit a vital organ, you're probably fine. But this type of weapon tumbles, and when it tumbles, it rips.
Did you carry any other weapons?
Oh, yeah. I had a .45 for a while. I don't think I ever used it. And then I brought it just for an example. Marine Corps has a knife, and it's called a K-bar. I don't know why it's called a K-bar, but it's called a K-bar. And this is a K-bar. That's here, put on your belt this way, so it's hanging on your side. And this is a K-bar. Now, actually, this particular K-bar, I don't think I carried there. I think it's a different one, because when I came back, when I left country, I was flown to Okinawa, and they took almost everything we had from in country away from us and gave us new stuff, and I got a feeling that that's what that is. I'm not positive, but I don't think that's the one. This seems too new to me. Anyway, that was that. But before we got the M14s, M16s, we had M14s, and then on the M14, you had a bayonet. And now this is a bayonet that went through the rifle and hooked on to its part right here for hand-to-hand combat, which I never had a problem with. I never had hand-to-hand combat, but this was a tool that I had over there for the M14, and this is what a bayonet is. And I don't know if they have much combat nowadays where they would use bayonets, because that's pretty much hand-to-hand combat. You're right there. So I don't know if that, I didn't see it put that way. Most of the stuff we had a perimeter, and it had to do with guarding the perimeter. And when we left the perimeter, during the day, it wasn't much of a problem, and at night, it would be for a patrol. So that's that.
What was it like returning home from Vietnam? When did you come home?
I was supposed to come home, and it was my tour was over on February 14th, 1968. However, when you're in country, if they have flights open, they call it rotating. When you rotate out, when you rotate back home, I was supposed to have been rotated in the latter part. In fact, it's supposed to be rotated in the end of January, but in about the middle of December, I got a guy coming at me and saying, "Rick, quick, get back, get your shit, you're going home." There was an open seat, and I came home in December of '67, meaning home, meaning to the United States. First of all, we left there. I landed in Okinawa. They took all of our gear and our uniforms, and we had stored uniforms there on the way over in lockers, and most of those were destroyed from the humidity or the wet or whatever it was. But I got one uniform back, the one I had to have in order to get out and fly, military flight, to go home. Anyway, from there we went to Hawaii. And by the way, I left country again on a private jet, Continental, and went to Okinawa, and from Okinawa to Hawaii. Okinawa, we stayed 3 days. Okinawa to Hawaii, and then Hawaii to California.
So you said you left in December. I know the Tet offensive was happening
January.
Just a few days after.
Yeah, I would have been there for Tet if I would have stayed with my normal. I didn't have to stay, which was really good, because the North Vietnamese Army, which I never saw when I was there, I only saw the Viet Cong. You know, the freedom fighters, or what I call it. I never saw an NVA regular. They supposedly, I got a letter from my buddy that they came from the north, actually went right through where we were and kept going south. A whole division of them. at night, and they just came through and went all the way down to South Vietnam. I'm told during Tet.
Did your battalion engage?
No, it didn't, because there was too many. I mean, we were a small group comparatively speaking, and if we would have had what they call an LP, a listening post, out from the perimeter, and you would have saw that many guys coming, you certainly aren't going to trip that switch. You know, if there's 12 of you there and they got a division of men coming, you're just not going to do anything. You just sit quiet and let them keep going. And that's what they did. From what I told, my friend told me, we just let them walk through, he said. And then the Tet offensive occurred mostly in the south. There was some stuff in the north, but not much, I don't think.
So you returned home just before the Tet.
Yes.
What was it like returning home?
I've read a bunch of things that veterans say, and I experienced, but my fear in speaking up is that it's just going to be challenged again, and then one of us is going to look bad. So I will say this. There was especially in California. California is a more progressive state, and being in the military and coming back to California, they're not very receptive, put it that way. It's not like they treated us terribly mean, although when we got off the plane, it was after midnight. And you guys mount or get on a plane and get off a plane nowadays, you get in those things that they push against the plane. That's not the way it was then. It was 50 years ago, and they would push out a ladder, you know, one of those, they push it against the plane and you would deboard. And when we deboarded, it was in a public airport. I forgot which one. But when we got down, they had it cordoned off on both sides. And there were protesters there, and they did say things. Now, when I read the media's attempt, they're basically calling us veterans liars as to what we saw and heard. And I heard it. But aside from that, once I made it into the airport, I was okay. And after that, when we got onto base, the Marine Corps commanders that were there at the time told us not to take our uniform on, don't put it on again until we're going home, because you'll just piss off the locals if you go into town. You might get in a fight, and so just leave them alone. And so that was that. Then if I ever run into veterans, they're terrific. I mean, at the airport when I left there was a bunch of veterans that took care of me. They saw me in my uniform, and they made sure everything was just perfect. Guys that were now let out of the businessmen that would be in the airport would notice us, and they could tell. However, when we got home, I think I've told you this, I did not have the problem that some people call PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, or disorder. I didn't have that. However, I did have stress. And the stress was coming back into this situation. And let me explain to you one of the things that is hard. If you are 19 years old or 20, and you get over one of those things, and I put you in charge of $20 million worth of equipment and people's lives, and then when you come home, they imply you're not even fit to do the most menial jobs. That is stressful. I had a case of the ass when I came home when people would treat me like that. So was I suffering from PTSD? No. Did I have stress? Yes. I had attitude. I was angry, and there was doors closed that I didn't know. If I told you the story, I applied for a few jobs, and one of them was a police job. And I went, and the police captain knew me, had the same last name as me, and I passed the test. I went for the physical. I did all the things you're supposed to do, and the last thing you do is get to talk to a local board or something that approves you, and I didn't get approved. And it was because I was a veteran and because I was a Marine that they didn't approve it. Their stance was, we don't know if you'd be a fit in our organization. I said, what the hell does that mean? Well, the chief explained to me, they think, well, you were a Marine, you go to work in Milwaukee and fight the fight in Milwaukee and be able to pull your gun and be able to arrest people. We don't do that out here. So I said, wow. The doors closed for what? Because I was a veteran, That's what ticked me off. So my anger was more suited in the fact that of the non-acceptance. It's not that you would get into any verbal contact with anybody else, and nobody was hard on me. It was just the doors that were closed that you didn't even know that they just wouldn't accept you. That's the part that was a bother. And it was for the first, I'd say, I came home, I was 23, 22. I got married in 68. I had my son in 69. I had your mother, my daughter, in 70. I was 24 years old with 2 kids. And when I'd see people, and it becomes apparent that I was a veteran, I would see how some people treated me, and sometimes I was upset by it. Because they expected things that were negative, put it that way. It's not that they treated me bad. It's the unsaid things that bothered me.
What things do you think you were misunderstood for?
Well, they label Vietnam era veterans a number of ways. Number one, you're too stupid to beat the draft. Most people know how to beat the draft. You go to college, you pretend, you do this, you don't have to get drafted. What a dummy. Number two, well, you were in an area like that where there's lots of drugs, you might be drug infested, you come back, why do we want to buy that problem? We don't want to hire you, you might have a drug problem. Number three, maybe you got PTSD, maybe you got night sweats, maybe you got a problem. Why should we buy into that problem? And maybe you're super aggressive because you were trained in the Marine Corps to be a killer, which is false, but those are the kind of things employers would have in their minds for not hiring you. And how do you fight that? It's very hard. And so after a while, society was awakened to that problem. And then when I became much older, I noticed that everywhere I went, they would say something really nice to veterans. When they find out you're a veteran, they'd say, thank you for your service. It was kind of a mea culpa for how we were treated when we came home. It's not that we were treated badly, we weren't accepted, if you know what I mean. The common thought was that employers or people didn't want to buy into the problem, which was Vietnam veteran. That's why. And so it took me a while to handle, because I had an attitude. I had a short trigger. I had a very short trigger. Grandma will tell you I had a short trigger. A guy irritated me. I mean, I want to have your mother baptized. Your mother was born in 1970. I took her to the church that we were at in Whitefish Bay. Probably an affluent church, but I had rented a duplex that I got from a contractor, which was a super deal, and I wasn't affluent. I had nothing. And when I went to that church, this Monsignor started telling me all the things that I had to do and the money I had to pay in order to get, and I had to buy these flowers, and I had to pay for this choir, and I had to do all these, I had that money. And then he even told me that I had to change your mother's name. And I got pissed off. And I stood up and I told that Monsignor a lot of colorful language. I told him, don't get up, because he won't get up again. And so he stood there and his eyes got big. And I kind of became exactly what they're talking about, you know. But then on my way out, not the pastor, but one of the priests grabbed me by the shoulder and pulled me in the room. And he says, he's really an asshole. He said he's running this parish and he's proud that he supports 5 other parishes with the money they get here. And he's like running a business rather than a church. He said, number 1, bring your daughter to church Sunday, I'll baptize her. He says, and her name is just fine. And whatever he can afford, that's fine too. And I said, and I explained everything to him once he asked me, and he said, I understand everything. So yeah, I had a case sometimes where I'd fly off the handle, and that was one of them. But again, he really ticked me off. You know, I don't understand how they would. He ran that parish like he was running a business rather than a parish. You know what I mean? You know, when I was a kid, I was raised by nuns. They took the vow of poverty. Priests do not. This guy owned a realty company, this Monsignor. He was well-to-do, drove a beautiful car, supported all these parishes, and that's how he treated that, and it really ticked me off at that point.
So you said you were 24 years old, just came back from the war. You didn't have any money, and you had 2 kids and a wife.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you had to grow up very quickly after the war?
I did it before, and afterwards it was just a awakening. Now, I'll tell you what happened in that 70s is I got a job across the street. You're on 35th in Wisconsin. On the southwest corner is a white building now, but that used to be a Buick dealership, and I worked there for 5 years. And where this building is, over there, where your football field, that used to be a car dealership. And that was Humphrey Chevrolet. And that's where I worked for 5 years. But there was not a lot of doors open to me when I first came back, I'll say that. And why I say that is because when I was a kid and I was 18 years old, there was a lot. You guys, it's different for you guys. When I was 18 years old, you had choices to make. You could go into college or you could go to work. And what I mean by that, well, if you went to work, where could you go to work? There were at least 5 breweries in this area that all paid what they call a living wage. In other words, you could live on, you could raise a family with a single wage. You could have a health care, you could have a retirement program, you could have benefits where they would pay for education, a continuing education. There was lots of places to go. But when I came back, a lot of those dried up. And it was tough for me to find something at that point because I hadn't finished any college at that point. So it was tough to find decent employment. So to answer your question, what I did is I worked at those types of jobs. I was a used cars manager across the street at Quinlivan and Buick. And then I kept applying, and eventually I did get a job with the government because they had to hire me because I was a veteran. That was the federal law. So
what job did you get with the government?
Postal Service. And I took it at the time. The economy at one point was terrible. We had double-digit inflation. We had double-digit unemployment. and we had double-digit interest rates. It was called the misery index. You know, if you try to buy a house, you're paying 12% interest. It was horrible. It was, the interest rates were high. It was very difficult at that time, and so you needed a job, and you needed a well-paying job to get ahead. So when I took that job, it was because my kids had health care, like I would have a pension. It was something that I thought I needed to do.
So I guess that leads me into my next question. What were some of the biggest pressures on a young family in Milwaukee during the late 60s and 70s? Or what do you remember about your wife or the early years of your marriage?
In retrospect, I think we had it a little better than you guys because we could find things, we could find jobs, and when we did, a home was attainable. How do you start a family as a young person now unless you can build a home or buy a home? The median age when I was your age, or the age when you bought or built a home, was the late 20s. Nowadays, it could be well into the 30s. And it's based on double income. So people that aren't getting married now, how do they do it? I mean, you need quite a bit of income to qualify. So it's a little tougher for you guys than it was for me, to be honest with you. My problem was that the attitude they had toward veterans, it was a political thing. I think otherwise, I found everything to be decent wherever I went. I didn't have any problems.
What was your favorite job that you worked over the years?
That's a good question. Not a lot of them that I were crazy about. It was just, for me, it was just a job to make money. I think for you guys, do what you love. If you can do what you love, you're going to be happier. You're going to want to get up every morning. I didn't have that. I did what I had to do. So I felt that's what I needed to do. I'm a little disappointed in myself because I think I had potential to do more. But I don't want to say took the easy route. I took the safer route. I mean, I still made money. I still, for instance, when I worked for the post office, I worked so much overtime. I would work on the average of 2 hours overtime a day, and then my day off. When you added it up, I used to get 20 hours of overtime per week, average, sometimes more. With that, it meant when you got paid for 2 weeks, 2 40-hour weeks, I was getting paid for 3.5 because I'd have my 2 40-hour weeks, I'd have 40 hours of overtime, that's a third one, and because I was paid time and a half, that's another 20 hours. So when I went to work there, every 2 weeks I worked, I was paid 3.5. So that compared with also the fact that I did some things on the side, like I told you, I got into the wood flooring business, and whenever I needed anything extra, I would do wood floors. It started out when I built a home, I kind of exhausted my money in building the home and buying the lot, but I wanted some more in there. And one of the things was I wanted to put wood floors in the home, and I didn't have the money to have them do it. So I bought the floors and I bought the equipment. And when I bought the equipment, I installed my own floors. And then in order to pay for the equipment, I took jobs installing floors. And then after I paid for the equipment, whenever I need anything extra, like let's say I wanted a boat, or I wanted a nicer car, or I wanted something like that, I would do some wood flooring. But comparatively speaking, I took the job that had so much overtime that, comparatively speaking, the friends I had that were professionals that got their degrees would be making about $80,000 or $90,000 a year, and I was making that as a blue collar with all my overtime. So, and they were going in and out of jobs, and I had one that basically I got hired and I stayed there 40 years. I got hired when I was 30 years old and I retired when I was 70.
As a postal surface?
Mm-hmm. I took a management job, one there, for a while, but then I turned it in because it was like a high-class babysitter. These people that you dealt with were not, some of them weren't very responsible, and if you criticized them, you got accused as the manager. So I said, why am I putting through that? Because the manager got paid a bit more money, but then didn't get the overtime. He's on salary. So I said, that's not even worth it. I don't even want to do that. So.
Didn't you say you also worked at Frito-Lay?
Loved Frito-Lay. I think I forgot to tell you that, yeah. Frito-Lay was a snack food company owned by PepsiCo Corporation that paid commission, not hourly. And the thing I liked about it was that I had a certain number of stops I could make, and because I was fast, I could finish my day sometimes in 4 or 5 hours. And we were paid commission at that time of, I think, 13.5%. You can imagine I had 2 Century stores, and on Mondays and Fridays, it was not hard for me to sell them $1,000 worth of product. So if I was selling a $1,000 product, I was there an hour, and I made $130.
And that's a lot of money back then.
A lot of money back there, and in a short period of time, and I didn't have to punch a clock. And so, for me, how I got my start in life was I had that job during the day, and then I worked a factory job at night because my wife didn't work because we had the kids. And it was a deal we made together where she said, I'll take care of the kids till they go to school, and I'll work the 2 jobs. And I worked for Score D as a factory job at night. That's a job I had before I left, by the way. And part of the law says if you get drafted, they have to give you your job back.
GI Bill.
Yep. Well, I don't know if that's part of the GI Bill, but part of the draft thing, I think. I'm not sure. But when I came back and I had, 3 weeks vacation waiting for me and my job. The problem is when I got back, I'm low seniority, and low seniority meant they could put you everywhere. And every time I came to work, it was, this week I was there, that week I was there, that week I was doing everything from shipping and receiving to assembly to maintenance to driving a truck to, it was all the time until, and then eventually the workload lessened to the point where I got laid off, and that's when I got the Frito-Lay job.
So why did you stop working at Frito-Lay and eventually went to
It was a weird circumstance. Frito-Lay is owned by Godfrey Company. They, back then, and this was probably 40 years ago, they had half of the stores that they had in the area, which was about 30 of them. Half of them were owned by the corporation, and half of them were privately owned. And my Century store that I went to was privately owned. And I was going there, and I was selling, and the owner of the company said to me, do you have any deals today? I said, yeah, 1 free with a dozen. You buy a dozen boxes of chips, you get 1 free. He said, all right. He says, fill the whole front window up with boxes of chips all the way as high as you can. He says, I'll take 1 free with a dozen, all of them, because this is summer and they'll go quick. I said, okay. No, I did. Some guy taps me on the shoulder and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm putting up a display. He said, who authorized that? I said, authorized? He says, there's the owner. He's right over there. Go talk to him. I'm doing what he told me to do. He said, I didn't authorize that. I said, who are you? He said, I'm from Godfrey. I said, well, why are you putting me in the middle? Go talk to the boss. Whatever you guys figure out, I'll do. You want me to put these in the back? I'll put them in the back. He told me put them up front. And as it turned out, he said, I don't have to talk to anybody. I'm telling you, don't put this display up. I said, well, the owner told me to do it. Why are you putting me here? So I put the display up, what the owner said. Well, I drove in that night. I get in and there's a message for me that I've been banned from all Godfrey stores. That's what he did. He really bummed me out. And I couldn't make a living if I didn't have the Century stores because that was the bulk of my money, you know? So I was kind of really bummed out when that happened. But it was kind of, I was kind of in between a rock and a hard place there. I still don't know what I should have done. But if I go to the owner, he wants the one free with a dozen. Godfrey wants to control him, and I didn't know how to. So anyway, I lost that job. And that was a job I liked from the standpoint of convenience. I had a wife and 2 kids. I could run my life so much better because I sometimes I'd be home at noon. You know, I could get there, do my thing, be home at noon. It was great. I would have continued with PepsiCo, to tell you the truth.
What neighborhoods did you live in over the years? You said you built a home.
I've always lived in the North Shore. I was born on the east side, and if you go north from there, it's Shorewood, Whitefish Bay, etc. And I bought my first home in Glendale. I bought a lot in Glendale. You okay?
Yeah, I was checking.
Yeah, so I bought a lot in Glendale, and I built a home, and I was there for about 12 or 13 years. And then there was a project going to go in behind me, and I felt uncomfortable, so I sold the house, and I bought another home. I bought another lot, and I built a home in River Hills.
You built the home in River Hills after the Glendale house?
Yes.
Okay. What are some of the happiest moments that you remember from raising your kids?
I loved going up north. That was before we had a property up there. And before we had a property, I used to take the kids up north, and your mom will remember. I used to take my Suburban, and I had a aluminum boat. I could put it right in the back of the Suburban. And we would go to lakes, and we would put that aluminum boat in the lake, and we'd scout out all the different lakes we'd like to live on. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. Going up north, I think, when I rented my uncle's place, was really fun. We took people there, and it was a 100-acre lake. It wasn't very big, crystal clear. Very, very easy. Every day was kind of the same, but it was great because we'd go out for breakfast in the morning usually. Then we'd spend all day on the lake, eating snacks and whatever, and then we'd all take a shower and we'd go into town for dinner, and it was a lot of fun.
Finishing up here, did your children ask you about the war when they got older?
Not much, no.
What stories do you think are important to preserve from your generation?
The generation. Stories. The 60s were really volatile. I mean, I'll tell you the story I told you. When you're 17. You too?
I'm 18.
Okay. On my senior year of high school, I'm 17 years old. I come out of Riverside High School. We go to a pizza place that we always go to. And we're sitting in there, and the word comes out that Kennedy's been killed. That's how it affected us. And now that was in '63. I think the next one to be killed was RFK. I think that one might have been in '65. And I think in 68, Martin Luther King was killed. So the 60s were pretty violent. And I remember that pretty closely. And it made everybody question everything. And I'll tell you why. When Kennedy was killed, the explanation we got made absolutely no sense. None. Especially to a military guy. You were supposed to believe that a guy with a rifle that's a bolt action, that is provable, that could only have taken 8 seconds, because they have cameras, they have everything, and they've defined that window that he was on the 6th floor depository only had 8 point some seconds to get off 3 shots. Now with you as a logical young man, think of the weapon he had. He had a Carcana rifle bolt action. What is that? It's a World War I weapon that he bought on a magazine for cheap, $20 or something. Think of yourself as aiming from the 6th floor at a moving vehicle, shooting, re-aiming, shooting, re-aim, all in 8 seconds. It just didn't make sense that he could do what he did. And nobody believed, a lot of people didn't believe him. And the government spent a lot of time trying to convince us that it was true. Well, that was the Warren Commission. But in 1978, there was a new commission that was opened up to reinvestigate this thing. Because there was a police motorcycle parked the day that it happened. He pulled up there and he had his radio on. And that radio recorded that day the sounds. And they had technology in 78 that proved beyond the shadow of a doubt there was 4 shots. And 4 shots proved there was a conspiracy. Because even if you believed the 3 shots there, where'd the 4th one come from? No explanation in a Warren report? No explanation. And you had to believe, when you saw a picture of Kennedy getting shot from the front, the back of his head comes out this big piece of, and his wife jumps on the back of the car to try to retrieve it. Now you have to believe that he got shot from the back. If anything you know on weapons, if you shoot from the shot, it pierces the front and blows out the back. It's hard to believe, and people didn't believe. And what the significance of that is people who in their whole lifetime, including my parents, who believed their government, questioned it. And from that day, people questioned their government because they don't believe they were. Now, maybe they felt they had to lie to us for some other reason, but it's pretty evident to us that they lied to us. And why that's significant is that if you've spent your whole life with the assumption that what they tell you is true, and now you don't believe it, it kind of makes you apprehensive about everything they say. And I don't think that existed before that shot came off in 1963. I think the apprehension of people toward their own government increased after that assassination. And then, of course, you had 2 more assassinations. Robert Kennedy's own son believes what happened with him was not accurate, and he was there. And we still don't know what happened with Martin Luther King, with the guy that shot him. That's still a little fuzzy. And it's not about who did it, it's who paid him to do it. And who was involved in the assassinations? Who benefited from it? And so all of that lent me to believe as a young man that people were lying to me, and if I felt that, you get apprehensive about what anybody says. You know, there's a saying back there, believe nothing that you read and only half of what you see. And you and I talk, AI, that's what you worry about now. Is it real or is it bullshit? Well, that's what we felt back then. And it started with the first Catholic president being assassinated on television.
In closing, is there a moment from your life that you've never been asked about but wish people would ask?
I can't think of anything. I don't know if I want to tell people. I mean, this interview today is something I have never done. I've never explained these things to anybody, even my own family. When I came home, there were not a lot of questions asked. People tiptoed around us. What'd you see? Well, I don't want to disturb anything. I don't want to ignite anything, so they would kind of just leave us alone. I can't think of anything that I would want to tell anybody else, no. I tell things to Mom, my wife, because it's between her and I. But there's so many things I don't trust, I'm afraid to speak, because I'll be interpreted in such a way that I think it's not beneficial. Because just the fact that I told you about how I feel about Kennedy, people like me back then were considered wackos. If you didn't believe the government that the assassination was by one guy. It's just hard to believe. I think now more than 50% of the people don't believe it. And it's been years, and I don't know if we'll ever find out now. All those people are dead. Well, I don't think we'll ever really find out what happened. But it's for sure he got killed. And why? Who did it? You can't tell me that guy up in that room did it by himself. And how did he get away with it? And why did they have to murder him right away so he couldn't talk? So I don't have a lot of faith, put it that way, in things that I'm not sure about. And so I think if you've been in the military, you tend to trust other military, but that's about it.
All right, that's all the questions we got for you today. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Where's the teacher? He never come back. Huh?